when everyone's ready.
That's a hint. Not so soft.
Okay. Everyone here should know me. My name's Ian Mavric. I'm from Australia. You may know me from previous products as the Fred hard drive emulator, the Model 4 high resolution graphics board, and also the MC of the Trash Talk Live that we do every month. So I'm glad to be here. You'll have to understand that I'm a little bit sort of nasally at the moment. I'm recovering from a cold coupled with a good amount of jet lag and tiredness. So if I sound a little bit offensive, please humour me. If I run out, because I have to blow my nose, but I'll try to remember to switch off my mic so you don't have to hear that at full volume. Okay, so today is a little bit of a history lesson on one of the lesser known clones of the TRS-80 Model 1, which was in Australia known as the Dick Smith System 80. It was sold here in the US as the PMC-80 81, and in the UK as a video Genie. It's an interesting name, Dick Smith. Not many people name the computers after themselves. I suppose Clive Sinclair did, but he left the Clive off. Australians being what we are, if your first name's Dick, you want to why not put it on the computer? So this is Dick Smith here. Yep. He's an Australian entrepreneur who started Dick Smith Electronics, which is like a small Australian version of Radio Shack, and it was fairly successful from when he opened it in about 73, and he sold it off to a different consortium in the early 80s. So this computer was his, well, he decided he wanted a computer because he looked at what Tandy was doing, Tandy Electronics, and said, well, they're doing it and so should I. So he's quite a character, Dick Smith. Just a little history on him. He has a great sense of humour and is staunchly pro-Australian. So to explain these slides, is anyone here under 50? I don't think so. So you all know what matches are, right? Yeah. So the great Australian match company was Redheads, and it sold out to an international company, so it's stopped being an Australian company. It happens to all countries, and if there's any Canadians here, that it's similar to what happened to Tim Hortons. It's still Canadian, but it's owned by Americans. So, and he didn't like that, so his famous statement was, we would have to be complete dickheads to let most of our famous Australian brands be taken over by foreign companies. And he released these as a gag product for a while, and they're highly collectible, like anything now that's no longer available. So that was Dickhead Matches. Yeah. So. Yeah. All right. So. In '79, Dick saw how well the TRS-80 and Apple II were selling and decided Dick Smith Electronics needed to peddle a low-cost computer that was not the XD Sorcerer. The reason I say that is because he did stock and sell the Sorcerer. The trouble is that a fully maxed out Sorcerer is a pretty expensive computer, and in order to get something in the same price bracket as the TRS-80 Model 1, it was never going to be the Sorcerer. So he got in contact with a company called Eka, I call it Eka, in Hong Kong, who were pretty handy at designing and cost reducing things, and they were talking about designs for a TRS-80 compatible or an Apple compatible. I'm And this is what came out of that. I would imagine that there would have been a question going through their minds as to either company is going to probably litigate against us for producing a compatible, which one's likely to sue us for less. So we'll build the TRS-80 clone. So so this is the first one. This is what came out, and it's a bit of crap. Yeah, I mean, oops. Where's the arrow keys? Yeah, what arrow keys? And we got a nifty little tape deck here, but no volume control. And you know how sensitive the volume control is. So it worked, but it was far from, perfect. And but that's what that's the first Dick Smith System 80. I always thought it was amusing, and it also says there in text, third generation computer system. Third generation. Do you know what the first generation of computers used? Or valves or vacuum tubes. Second generation, transistors. So this is so bleedingly obvious, built around TTL IC technology. It seemed kind of an interesting thing to put on it because it was bleeding obvious, but anyway, marketing. So another thing I found amusing was that the introduction, the first messages and advertising of the System 80 were in Electronics Australia magazine that features a great big Model 1 on the cover. So that was kind of cool. So that is October 1979. So they've got the basic design of the machine worked out by then. So we've got a plastic case, fake wooden sides, a tape deck, and we'll get to the insides in due course. So this is a typical Dick Smith advertising. Lots of very highly dense ad with lots of hyperbole, I guess. So the price point, so level 2 basic, $595 is mentioned here. It's mentioned with 4K RAM. Now, interesting that by the time they came out, they'd effectively dropped the 4K model before it even hit the shelves, and so no one has ever seen a 4K System 80. They're all 16K now, which is $695. And some interesting statements here. Yeah, we agree that Tandy TRS-80 has been the best-selling microcomputer in the world. The original design is now 2 years old. And so this one here, because I've got one here, yeah, it's a long time. Yeah, if he could only be here now. He's still alive and kicking around. He probably gets asked questions about the System 80 all the time. So
Mostly doing ham radio stuff.
yeah, and he was originally he started up Dick Smith Electronics mainly for ham and amateur radio enthusiasts. This picture of him here, when he sold the company in '83, he included that picture of him, which is from about the early 70s. And Dick Smith as a company can only use that picture of him, regardless of how old he gets or anything. That's the Dick Smith picture. So that picture of him was there right until the company went defunct in, I think, 2002 or something. All right, so let's get a better look at this thing. All right, so I've talked about the main unit. Looking from behind, we've got a big power supply built in. That's a plus over the Model 1 with its external power supply. Expansion bus connector is not compatible with the Model 1. We've got a reset button, a strange video cut switch, which just changes it from 64 column mode to 32 column, whereas on a Model 1 you would do that with software. A monitor port and a cassette port. It actually talks to 2 cassette recorders with a bit of a limitation. You can load and save from the built-in one, but it's difficult to load assembly programs from the second cassette. They forgot about that. So, you know.
And as you note, the video cut switch sets you to 32 column mode, and then they added a key to swap pages on the front of the keyboard.
Yeah. So the I wasn't sure what they were really thinking, or to make it different enough from the TRS-80 to not have their asses sued off them, but at the same time put a function in that nobody will ever use. So
So you couldn't go with software?
I think you can still do it that way, but they went to the extra effort of putting a button in. This is the black label. This is the second one that came along. Shift key. Where's the other shift key? You know, I mean, and the arrows are still all right. Well, we have got a volume control and a tape meter. So loading tapes on these things is real easy. It almost always you load it the first time. If it craps out, you have a look at what the level is, adjust it, rewind it, and it'll almost certainly load in the second time. But we still got keyboard problems in that it's lacking a little bit. And so by this time, the computer's been on the market for around 18 months, and it's selling okay, but I think finally they got the memo through to ICA and said, right, we need arrow keys and we need 2 shifts, and we'll be good. And so this is probably the most popular one, and certainly the one everyone is after. It's called the System-80 Blue label. It's not really blue, it's more navy, or you know, it's not obvious, it's not blue like this, it's what it is. As you can see with all these modern day pictures I've shown you of it, it yellows like, you know, like all these other old computers, and some of them, I mean, this one's pretty good. I've seen ones that look like cheddar cheese, and you know, or McDonald's hamburger cheese. You know, it's almost orange. So yeah. So that's the most popular one, and the one that's that people are generally after. Okay, so let's look inside them. So they all have this construction. Can't bring you anywhere with me.
That's right.
Eric? Yeah. What's a tandy assembly without a gaff here and there? All right, so we've got our power supply up here. So a big ass linear transformer there, and some other stuff. So that comes out of a connector here and goes around there, and it goes to the CPU board. And the CPU board is connected by a cheap ass. I'm going to use the word cheap a lot in this because in order to make it cheaper than TRS-80, they had to cut some corners and do a bit of cheapiness to it, and it got you a good computer that ran all right for a while, but it's like anything that's cheap, you got to really love it if you want to fix it. So this is, we call this the processor board because it's got the 40-pin processor on it. And this is the video cassette board, in that it's got the video output and the cassette interface. So this is powered by this one, this cable here, as well as all the data and addressing goes across this thing here. ROM chips here, character generator chip here, VRAM for the video here, and we've got another cable running from approximately here to the cassette player. RF modulator is, these were sold, we'll get to the monitors in a moment, we've got one here, but they were marketed so that people could hook them up to a television set. Now, it's not as crap as it sounds, because our Australian PAL television sets have a little higher definition than your NTSC ones, so you actually get a fairly legible display out of it, whereas if you put a Model 1 through a modulator onto a NTSC TV, looking on a Coco, but just twice as hard to read every character.
So that was a money saving. That you didn't have to buy the monitor at extra price like you would with PMC.
Yeah, yeah. It worked well enough on TVs to get you started, but at the same time, after a few weeks or months, you'd sort of pony up the dually and go and buy the right monitor. So he's a good marketing guy, Dick Smith, from that point of view. So what's the next panel? All right, so getting down to, all right, so on the positive side of things, they did learn from the TRS-80 connector fiasco and put and sported for gold connectors on System 80 devices, so they don't suffer from the cable oxidization problem TRS-80s do. But on the other hand, they use the cheapest sockets. They're not dual wipe sockets, they're single wipe sockets, and if you've ever done anything in electronics, they're good for one or two insertions, but then they start to be rubbish. And so there's some boards passing around, so you can have a look at them, how they are, and you can see that compared to a TRS-80 board, I find them to be a little bit more cheaply made. When they're working, they're fine.
And the stiff wire interconnect is a big point of failure. You only flex them a few times and you get a pin break.
They never did. All System 80s have this same arrangement inside them, so that was just the way it was done. All right, so underneath the machine, we've got the information panel and copyrights. They didn't actually steal the interpreter from Microsoft. They actually paid properly for the Microsoft Level 2 basic interpreter, and then made some changes to it. But the detail in the Microsoft basic level 2 basic interpreter is that out of 12K, probably 11.5K of it belongs to Microsoft, and maybe 500 bytes or a small amount of it is Tandy copyrighted code used for I/O and other duties within the Model 1. So they've technically stolen those parts and reconfigured them and used it for this. So although the basic is Microsoft, if anyone wanted to pick a fight with them, they could say, well, the other bit you didn't, it doesn't belong to you. It was written by Leininger and Co. and you're not allowed to use it. So, but yeah, the question was, were they actually breaking any law by taking the level 2 basic? No, they negotiated for it properly. And like a TRS-80 Model 1, it wouldn't be the same without a expansion unit underneath it to lift the monitor up. And nice gold connectors, but also the same cheapish production. I don't know what these things are here, this picture where it came from. They might be original or add-on or something. A nice addition was an S100 bus. So the expansion board itself, that one, is an S100 card that slides into the back plane that you can just see poking out there. And there's two other slots where you can put S100 cards in. So it was a clever design from that point of view. You have to be choosy with your S100 cards, make sure they don't have I/O conflicts and IRQ conflicts and things, but the idea was sound enough.
The power supply was the same as in...
And the power supply, of course, yeah, was borrowed from the System 80. It's the same one, it's just turned around 90 degrees.
And an interesting note about the power supply, it's a self-contained unit with, it's got 3 screws holding it in and a quick connector, but the voltages are the same as on the Model 1 power supply.
Yep, and the whole power supply actually looks borrowed from the Model 1.
Did it have the refa cap issue?
No, it doesn't. No, but it has a different cap issue in that it has cheap, crapulent caps in it. So, you often find them when you plug them in after you acquire them. The picture's doing this, and it's not a video problem. It turns out not to be a video problem. It's a the word I'm looking for, Eric.
Bad cap.
Yeah, it was a bad cap, but
It doesn't stabilize the power.
yeah.
A lot of noise.
And it does have an MOV in there for protection. However, that would typically fail and take out your power supply too.
Yeah, it's a really simple power. On the plus side, it's a really simple power supply, so there's not many parts in it. So even if you had to pull your hair out and just replace everything except the linear transformer, it can be done in about a half an hour, and you can put the quality caps and diodes in that you want. Wouldn't be compatible with a Tandy if they didn't take a TV, pull the tuner out, and call it a computer monitor, and that's exactly what it is. They also like that it was green phosphate, as in big letters on it. We don't call Dick Smith calls a video monitor, not a video display. But it does have this guy here, which is kind of handy as an earphone jack. So it's got it can play sounds through the cassette cable. If you've got a cassette cable, people hook it up to there. The trouble is it has no volume control, so if you're not happy with the quite loud noise that comes out of it, it's kind of a bit, it's a bit much. It's a bit loud. So a lot of System 80s I find people have opened them up and installed a small audio amplifier and then a cable to come out to this jack here, and then they can adjust the volume on it. So that's a pretty common modification. It's isolated. We don't do hot chassis in Australia at 240. It's but they say don't open it, but people open things and who don't know what they're doing. And
the output for the video monitor, it's the same pinout and can use the same cable as a TRS-80. In fact,
we could use this monitor on it if we wanted. Yeah.
But on the back of the monitor, it's RCA instead of the cable being built in like in the TRS-80 monitor. And the cassette cable, there's a second cassette output on the back, and it's compatible with the TRS-80 cassette output.
Yep. So this picture doesn't really do it any justice, and it looks pretty good here. Yeah, it's not a bad monitor for a TV that's been converted. They sold these in two forms: a black and white one with a TV picture tube for $149, and then they made the green phosphor one with a computer grade P31 tube in it for about $100 more, and that was the most popular one. I've never looked that far into it, but I don't see why not. It looks a lot like those sort of 12-inch black and white television sets of the era. Wait, there's more. Yeah, I mean, by this time I was a disc operator. I hardly touched cassettes, so and so they figured, yeah, well, we've got a lot of space here. Let's put a keypad. You can still connect a cassette player up to this if you want to use it for that. But so we got to make the things even more confusing. We've got not one or two or three like the Model 4, but 4 function keys. So function away. Yeah, that's their business computer. Let me look. Yeah, I don't know where in the publicity or whether, but I've got one of these business computers, and so has Eric. It's got 2 shift keys.
It's
so
basically the same keyboard here. Just they modified the layout to add a connector so you can connect to the keypad. So it's the same layout as the third version.
yeah, and like a TRS-80, the black bezel is all the thing that's different. Once you can change the keypad, the black bezel gets changed.
And did the business computer run at the higher clock speed than
Did nothing. It did nothing other than have a keypad. And I had the lowercase modification from the factory, so it was kind of oriented more for professional users. So yeah, and they produced an educator version, which is very hard to find. I don't think many people bought it. It just looks like a business version with educator written on it. So at the same time as a business computer, about end of '82. More typical Dick Smith advertising. Yeah. Now, let me see. They haven't mentioned numbers here, but Australia is a large country with a small population, so it'll be written in one of the next slides. They sold all up about 13,000 of these in Australia, which makes it hard to find them now. There's not that many around. Did you have a question, Jay? No. Okay. A bit more advertising. So there is sort of pushing it as a business system there. Usual accessories. Yeah, he did put his name on a few printers, but after a while he just started carrying Epsons and CITOs and other things. And the disk drives are nothing particularly special. They're a total peripherals TPI drive in a locally made case and power supply. At the time, Radio Shack was selling the same drives for $5.99 or something, and we're talking about $1983, so that's a reasonable savings.
And they did later come out with another expansion interface that didn't have S100 in it, so that was a little cheaper.
I think it was cheaper to make one without S100 in it, and the amount of people that were buying it for its S100 capability was not that many. It was kind of a solution to a problem no one asked.
Those were Australian models, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So it would boot up all the Model 1 DOSes? It was fully compatible, use the same floppy disk controller?
Yeah, it's from that point of view, it's actually quite compatible. It's at that level, just about everything works. NuDOS works, TrisDOS loads up on it, LDOS if you're an LDOS convert like me, all those ones all work fine on this. Where it actually with the keyboard lack of arrows and things like that, it became a problem because people first thing they want to do before serious stuff with their computer is play games. And
the expansion connector was not compatible with the Model 1. It's a 50-pin on the System 80 and derivatives versus the 40-pin on the Model 1, so you can't just connect the Model 1 expansion interface into it.
Yep, and before anyone asks, the 50-pin is not compatible with the TRS-80 Model 3 or 4. It was probably just done like that to make the thing so not obviously a copy of the Model 1. Europe got it. So before I go on to this next section, so ECA doesn't work for Dick Smith. ECA's an independent company, and they sell the product to Dick Smith's specifications. But once it's locked down, they write into the contract that they can sell it in other parts of the world, just not Australia and New Zealand, where Dick Smith was a thing. And so in Europe, it was just called the ECA Video Genie system, EG 3003. That's basically the same one. I don't know where the volume control is or whatever, but
Just like the System 80 is, they made the newer versions with the different keyboards and features. They didn't change it from like the EG 3003 to the 3004 or anything. They kept the same label, they just added features. So new keyboard, adding the volume control. So there's one back there that's a Video Genie that is similar to this one with the same feature, same keyboard layout.
Yep, there's very few Video Genies in this country. They're only going to be personal imports. And of course Genie 2 came along, which is basically the business computer. They're making business computers for Dick Smith, may as well put our label on it and call it the Genie 2. And in the USA here, some of you may know it as the PMC-80. Who used to read 80 Micro back in the day? Yeah, most of you. I did, yeah. They were advertised very aggressively, and for a few years they were available. I don't know much about the success of it in the USA, but it was available for a number of years, so it wasn't a complete flop. You've got to remember, of course, by the time the business system comes along and the PMC-81, which is that one with the keypad, the Model 3 has come and gone, and we're getting ready for the Model 4 to come along. So this is getting really dated at this time. Yeah. So there's not many contemporary reviews of the PMC-80 and 81, but there was some comments in 80 Micro in the the 10th anniversary issue in August of 1987, talking about that they picked up a bunch of these or got them at a special price or something for the office there, and that they were fine for like the first year, and then after that they just started having failures, power supplies blowing up, disk drives giving problems. So it's a sort of a casualty of its own cheapness. It doesn't look too bad, not bad of a system there. All right. Any questions before I move on?
2 questions.
I'm only going to let you have one, Blair. Only one question
They're not combined.
at a time.
What clock speed did it run at? Was it
1.77 megahertz. Yep.
And did Tandy ever litigate? Did they sue them?
In the United States, I think they tried. Tandy did try, but it was so late in the part that Personal Microcomputers was close to bankruptcy anyway. So they just kind of closed their doors one day, and it became a moot point. After that, it was no longer a competition for any of Tandy's computers.
PMC went on to make a little CPM system.
Yeah,
So
which I've never seen one of. So they.
the Micromate.
Okay. Yep. Yeah.
Did you ever build anything else, like Model 3 or Purples?
No, they produced one more machine after this, which is an all-in-one machine, but it wasn't. Was it compatible with a Model 3, or is it?
Semi also did 80 column, I think, so almost a Model 4.
Yeah, it did.
But it was only sold, as far as I know, in Europe.
Yeah, it's a strange-looking thing, and I wouldn't call it properly compatible with a Model 3 or 4. So it's hard to say what it was trying to do, and it was really at the last breath of ECA. After that, they just called it quits. It's not perfect, so things to look out for. I've mentioned most of the stuff before. So the sockets are single wipe, so they're garbage. This thing is brittle, so it doesn't like being unplugged and plugged in many times. But if you're repairing one of these things, you're going to be unplugging it a lot. The circuit board itself seems cheaply made. The traces between the ICs are all extremely thin. The pads, the solder pads, do not put up to much abuse at all. Very easy to overheat them and lift them. They're not my favourite machine to work on. Is an understatement. The modulator is there.
No,
For
but
the
they did get rid of the modulator in the business computer.
yeah, they figured it was going to be used in a. These capacitors are big and feel like they're from the 60s. They're just disc capacitors. They could have used something much smaller, but obviously they got them cheap. And on the video, on the processor board, we've got another one of those wire connectors connecting to the keyboard. So that's what I should have mentioned if it wasn't obvious. That picture earlier I showed you of the machine opened up had the keyboard lifted off so that you could see its innards. This one at least is only 20 pins and can be replaced with an IDE cable fairly easily. This one is many more than 20 pins, and it's hard to find a IDC connector that has enough pins on it to fabricate something a little more robust for the interconnection between the two boards.
And also the holes are very tiny, so a standard IDC connector does not fit in.
Yep. And the other idea we had was if you got two IDC, say a 40 and a 34, but they won't fit close enough to each other those who are EEs know what I'm talking about. All right, the ROMs are cheap as well. They suffer byte rot. I've repaired a million TRS-80s, and I've never had one with a bad ROM. Say what you like about Tandy, they use a good quality Motorola sourced PROM, masked PROM, and I've never seen one give a problem. But these things regularly suffer byte rot. So you can get one of these, turn it on, it just has garbage on the screen. I know where to start with a TRS-80. These you've got to actually start and check that these ROMs are working properly even before you proceed to CPU, RAM, and other issues with the machine. So, and they're not standard sockets; they're masked PROM sockets. So you've got to sort of modify the board to take 2716 and 2732 EPROMs for it to all work. So if you have to do it, buy good quality EPROMs, because you don't want to be... Same as our Model 1, 16 in the computer, 32 in the box.
And for the EPROMs, the earlier ones had 12K just like the Model 1, and then the later versions added a 2K PROM that had like lowercase driver built into it and the key bounce built into it that you could activate, blinking cursor, just little features like that.
Yeah, so the configuration was the first of the machines, the black label ones, and had just 3 ROMs, those 3, and that was an empty socket. The Mark II Business and Educator had an extra EPROM in there with, well, in the case of the business one, it was lowercase driver and flashing cursor. I think the Educator, I don't know what it had, maybe a terminal program or something. So that's the video board, video cassette board again. Yeah, basically what I've already just said. The pads, you got to be really careful soldering these things. This one, note of point, this is the video RAM here. It uses 2 4K by 1 bit video RAM chips, whereas the previous video board used 8 1K by 1 bit chips, similar to the Model 1. All right. Yeah. Cheap capacitors, clock crystal. It's the first time I was sort of scoping around one, and I leaned on the clock crystal, and it started working, and I took my hand off it, and it stopped working. And so I thought, okay, I'll just resolder this clock crystal, and then it broke off. And I didn't have any, because they're a speed that's not used by very many things. So I had to pilfer one from a Model 1, and it just sort of, I've noticed on these things, the clock crystal, if you give it a little wiggle, it'll break off. It's hopeless. I've talked about the byte rot, DRAM chips, the SRAM chips on the video of these things. As you know, with Model 1s, you can have what they call spelling errors when the static RAMs give you, or they give out and they print the wrong thing on the screen. I've seen System 80, someone bought one to me which had weird stuff on the screen. 7 of the 8 had failed, and yeah, and they're hard to get, those 1-bit static RAM chips.
What was the serviceability of these machines back then? I mean, were they, you go out and buy one, were you able to get service?
Well, Dick Smith was good in that, and similar to Tandy in that you could take your stuff back to him and they would repair it. They did produce a good series of service manuals and stuff, and the Dick Smith was kind of well, Tandy Electronics was more of the consumer end of electronics stores, whereas Dick Smith was aimed more towards hardware hackers and people like us who like to solder things and so on. So if you couldn't fix it, you could get them to fix it, and they had technical manuals and stuff on how to repair them. So yeah. Curiously, they did put in an NEC Z80 clone CPU, which I've never seen one fail because they're NEC. They're a really good product. So by contrast of the Model 1s, where they put in a Mostec cheapened version of the Z80, and I see them fail all the time. Even the expansion box is really cheap, but at least we've got no connector problems with the gold connectors. Yeah. As the power supply is a good look inside it. That's all that's in it. That's why that's why you don't stress out if it doesn't work properly. Just change these three and these diodes here, and don't worry about it for another decade. Yep. All right. Finishing up the System 80 part. Where to find them? eBay mainly. I don't know about Craigslist or other Facebook marketplaces in the States, but the going price, working 500 to 700 Australian, non-working 300 to 400. They're mainly bought by people who know how to fix them. So what matters actually more is the cosmetic state of them as opposed to the operational state. These monitors, 250 to 500. I'd say with the green one, probably 500. If it works and it's green, that's what people sell them for. Expansion box, very hard to find. Probably like the Model 1, they sold 5 Model 1s for every expansion interface, so there's not a lot of these things around. So when they come up, people want a pretty penny for them.
And if you do find them, you think it's hard to ship the Model 1s and 3s and 4s and the 8-inch systems without them breaking. Taking it cheap, the plastics are very cheap and easy to fracture and shred.
Yep. Derek's going to talk to you for a moment while I go blow my nose, and then we'll come back with the Tech Model 1.
What time do we...
What time we finish? Well, this is only going to take about 10 minutes, and we'll call it that. What time have we got to finish, Peter? Yeah, too easy. Where's my...
Short cover.
I'll be back in a sec.
Okay. What's that? This one? No, I brought this is the S100 expansion, and I brought it to show, but it's currently non-functional, so that's the word. Where did he set it? Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, next cover briefly the TEC Model 1. This one was made after the end of the original Model 1s were made in Fort Worth. And later they decided they needed a cost-reduced, more reliable version. So they had TEC design them. And when you see one, they had 2 models. The first one has the same keyboard as the US and the original UK, etc. model. But they also made one for the Japanese market with a Kana keyboard. And if you notice, there's one shift key here, but this shift key now toggles between ASCII and Kana. So the commands don't work in Kana. So if you hit the Kana key, you don't get ASCII characters. So you have to make sure you're in the right mode. And the system boards are the same between the two. The only difference is there's jumpers, and you could set 4K versus 16K. You could set 50 versus 60 hertz, and you can set ASCII versus Kana keyboard. So they're very flexible and easy to change in that respect. But the Kana keyboard, the matrix is completely different. So none of the standard operating systems work on it. And so far I've been unable to find any of the Japanese operating systems. So if anybody's watching this and has that, please get in touch with me. But there's the keyboard on this, and did you have a picture?
I do. That's as close as I've got. But
the ROMs for the Kana version are actually on the keyboard itself. And there's an extra ribbon cable going from the system board to the keyboard for the extra signals because, as I said, the key matrix is completely different. So, you know, they needed extra lines for the extra keys, because if you take a look, there's a few extra keys on there. And the Model 1, we all know about the cable between the system board and the keyboard. It's fragile, it breaks, people are replacing them with IDC connectors, etc. But on these, the cable between the keyboard and the system board are the thin flex cables, such as the ones used in the Model 3 and the Model 4 non-gate array to connect the floppy controller and the RS-232 board. It's not the same number of pins. Those are 20 pins. This is 19 pins, so it's not compatible. It's also shorter. And then the Kana keyboard, there's an additional 9-pin for the extra connection. So I'm currently looking to get some of those made, because just like the flat cables on the Model 3 and Model 4 non-gate array, over time they do wear out and they start, you know, falling apart and breaking. So this one's just held together right now. So if I take it apart and separate it out, it's going to be a little bit of pain to get it back together. And
Did you want me to get a move on?
and here's the label on the bottom. You can see the serial numbers in a different format. Rather than all numeric, this one starts with 1P. On the Japanese, it starts with 1S. Now, we don't have enough of these to know if there's any further differentiation. Is P always going to be the ASCII and S Kana? But, you know, there's only like 3 examples of the Kana keyboard that we know about. And the catalog numbers are changed. That's 26-7016A for that one. I think it's the same for this one. No, this one's 1006A. So it's the same serial number as a 16K Model 1 with the original motherboard. They just add an A at the end, and then 7 means Kana.
And is the keyboard matrix the same on
This one?
as
This one, the ASCII keyboard has the exact same matrix. So, you know, this one, if you connect it up to an expansion interface, it'll boot the standard DOSes. The software, all, you know, it all works. It's all completely compatible. It's just a more simplified, more reliable motherboard.
Cool. All right. So, I gather most of you, at least some of you, would have read my articles I wrote for Terrace 8-Bit newsletter, the most recent one just this last month, about we'll call them tech Model 1s. They're the ones that are made in Japan ones. So, short story, what I hypothesised, because I've never been able to prove it, was that Tandy originally planned not to replace the Model 1 with the Model 3, but to sell the Model 1 alongside the Model 3 as an entry-level computer and the Model 3 as a professional computer. They've only got one place to build computers in TCA, and so they were building Model 3s, so they would outsource it to Japan to make the Model 1s, which eventually became these. Intertwined with that is the FCC debacle of the computer making too much noise and being told you got to stop selling these things by December 1980, which they proceeded to do, though you could get the expansion interface for another year or so after it. But it must have taken a little while for the memo to get to Japan to say, hey, stop making these things. We can't sell them here. And so the ones that were made, I guess, were then shoved into the European, Australian and Japanese and UK markets, but never in Australia, never in the United States and Canada, making them extremely rare here. And they were available in our country until basically the end of 1983. So so they were available for a long time after the Model 1 had been discontinued in its home country. So in that advertisement from Tandy Electronics' yearly catalogue in Australia, you can see they've cost reduced it to $749 and put in a TV modulator. Might have got the idea from this thing here, to use it on a TV, and then people after a while will relent and buy a monitor for it. so that was how it was until the time that it ran out. To put it into some kind of perspective, that is more expensive than a 16K extended basic Coco, but less expensive than a 32K extended basic Coco, and it's more expensive than the newly released at the time Commodore 64. So it was a bit of a slow sale. So this compares the two motherboards of the Tech and the US one. So the power supply segment is pretty much copied between them. That's the Tech one at the top, because you can see the removable keyboard cable as opposed to the soldered in one. Power supply is basically the same. Cassette relay is much more robust. This tube thing is the cassette here, but it's not cassette relay, but it's not particularly robust. That one, you can hear it clicking from another room. Yeah, 2 ROMs in the middle, no cable. Got RAM here. CPU has moved down a little bit, so it's gone down a little bit like that. It's moved down to this, which is a problem if you've got boards like CPM boards or other things that plug into the CPU sockets. A lot of them, trouble to get them to work. They electronically work, but you can't close the case. Where is it? So this is the character generation section. I haven't got the Kana kit, but that's where it sort of plugs into and connects. That's part of it there, that empty socket there. It says Tech TRS-80 made in Japan. They must have, well, it wouldn't be a Radio Shack product, would it, if it didn't have a bodge wire, you know, added for some reason. So even this thing, with the greatest minds in Japan designing it, forgot a wire, and they've all got this blue wire here. But they did get the memo from Tandy that the stupid card edge has to stay solder covered, not gold plated. So, you know, they had a chance to really make it really improve that.
Bottom, about a third from the left, you can see the empty block. That's where the extra connector for the cable for the Kana keyboard connects in.
Here?
No,
or
that one,
yeah, okay, I never knew that. Like you said, there's only about 3 of these known to exist, and who knows how many they sold. I can't see them selling, being a top seller in Japan, so you're very lucky to see it. You might never see one of these again other than at a show like this. Yeah, it's a monitor. It's one of these. That glare screen actually comes off. That's what it looks like once you take the glare screen off, and it's actually a pretty nice picture, I got to say. We call that an Australian monitor, but it's the monitor sold also in Europe and everywhere else, and it was a big improvement on the RCA monitor. My story to finish the talk off. Is this the last ever Model 1? Maybe, maybe not. So I'd been, at the time, I was doing some work. I wasn't working for Tandy, I was doing programming and selling systems in my locale. So I was very well known to the Radio Shack Computer Centre local to me, and come in one day and they said, hey, it's the end of the Model 1, the last batch of them in Sydney, and then once they're gone, they're gone. And I said, oh, that's a shame. I got an idea. Can you get someone there to go to the pallet, find me the highest serial number in that pile, and I'll buy it. I figure that's the last ever Model 1. So I bought it, and that's it there in the picture. But I've no way to confirm whether the picker in Sydney went through them all to find me the lowest the highest serial number, or they just grabbed the first one off the pile and said, we'll shut that guy up in Melbourne. And so it might be or it might be not, but it's unused and it's in its box, so it might be the last ever Model 1. The last ever Model 1 obviously can't be an American one because these things were available for quite some time afterwards. So that's it. So any questions or anything? Nope. All right, I'm done. Someone buy me a beer. Jordan and I drink Imperial pints.
Why did it so? Did you want to go to Japan? Was there a reason?
It was 1981. Everyone went to Japan to get their stuff built then.
And as he said, that they were using the U.S. facility